That was incredibly rude what just happened. I'm Andre. Would you mind if I sat down for a moment?
"You're not what I expected from your photos," Derek Mitchell said at 7:47 p.m. on a Friday evening, as he stood abruptly from the table at Bella Vista restaurant, where Jasmine Reed had been sitting for exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes that had transformed from hopeful anticipation about first date in 2 years into crushing realization that the man her best friend Lauren had set her up with was about to reject her publicly based on appearance that didn't match whatever idealized version he'd constructed from profile pictures that were recent but apparently not representative enough of body that had changed after car accident and grief, and 2 years of struggling to recognize herself in mirror. "I'm sorry, what?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely audible as she processed that date was ending before it had begun. That judgment about her body was happening in restaurant full of Friday evening diners who were now starting to notice man standing at table speaking with volume that suggested he wanted audience for his rejection. At 33, Jasmine Reed possessed the kind of careful confidence that characterized women who had spent their entire adult lives navigating comments about their appearance. She'd been thin in her 20s, gained weight gradually through her early 30s, then gained 47 pounds in 6 months after a car accident that had killed her best friend Sarah while Jasmine had been driving, creating grief and guilt that manifested through comfort eating that she intellectually knew was unhealthy, but emotionally couldn't stop, because food was only thing that temporarily numbed pain of survivor's guilt that therapy hadn't yet resolved. "Your photos were clearly from when you were thinner," Derek continued, his tone carrying mixture of annoyance and self-righteousness that suggested he believed he was being honest rather than cruel. "I don't appreciate false advertising. I take care of my body. I go to the gym 5 days a week, and I expect my dates to have similar standards. This," he gestured vaguely at Jasmine's body in movement that made her want to disappear, "is not what I signed up for." "Those photos are from 6 months ago," Jasmine replied, her voice shaking as she tried to maintain dignity while tears started forming. "I didn't falsely advertise anything. I've gained weight recently due to personal circumstances, but I'm still the same person. Look, I'm going to save us both time and be direct," Derek interrupted, pulling his wallet out to throw $20 bill on table in gesture that suggested he was paying for inconvenience of having met her. "I have standards, and you don't meet them. I'm not interested in a relationship with someone who's let herself go like this. You should probably work on yourself before trying to date again." "Deed," the statement hit Jasmine like physical violence, not just because of its cruelty, but because it articulated fear she'd been carrying for 2 years, that gaining weight had made her unworthy of love or connection or basic human dignity. And hearing that fear validated by a stranger who judged her appearance in 4 minutes confirmed every negative thought she'd been trying to counter through therapy and self-help books, and desperate attempts to believe that her worth wasn't determined by her dress size. Derek left without waiting for response, walking through restaurant with confident stride that suggested he felt no shame about public rejection he'd just delivered, leaving Jasmine sitting alone at table set for 2 with tears streaming down her face and awareness that everyone in restaurant had witnessed her humiliation, creating moment where private pain about body image had become public spectacle that dozens of strangers would remember as that woman who got rejected for being fat. For 37 seconds, Jasmine sat frozen, unable to process whether she should leave immediately to escape scrutiny or stay, because leaving would mean walking through a restaurant full of people who just watched her get rejected, creating no-win situation where both staying and leaving required enduring shame that Derek's cruelty had imposed. That was incredibly rude what just happened. "I'm Andre. Would you mind if I sat down for a moment?" said quiet voice to her left, and Jasmine looked up through tears to see black man in his mid-30s standing beside her table with expression that combined genuine concern with something else she couldn't quite identify. Recognition, maybe, or empathy that seemed too specific to be simple kindness to stranger. At 36, Andre Harrison possessed the kind of gentle authority that characterized pediatric nurses whose professional lives required comforting frightened children and worried parents. His presence was calming rather than threatening. His voice carried warmth that made people feel safe, and his decision to approach crying woman after witnessing her public humiliation was motivated not by attraction or pity, but by intimate understanding of what body-based rejection felt like, because he'd experienced similar judgment 3 years ago when grief over his wife's death from cancer had caused him to gain 63 pounds that people had commented on with concern that felt like criticism. "You don't have to sit with me out of pity," Jasmine said, using paper napkin to wipe tears while trying to maintain some dignity despite being emotional wreck in front of stranger who'd witnessed worst moment of her dating life. "I'm fine. I'll just finish my water and leave." "I'm not sitting with you out of pity," Andre replied, already pulling out chair that Derek had vacated and sitting down with calm confidence that suggested he wasn't asking permission, but rather stating intention to stay, regardless of her protests. "I'm sitting with you because what that man did was cruel and unnecessary, and no one should have to process that kind of humiliation alone in a room full of strangers who are all pretending they didn't just witness someone being dehumanized." "You saw the whole thing?" Jasmine asked, mortification intensifying as she processed that Andre hadn't just noticed aftermath, but had witnessed entire rejection, including Derek's comments about her body and his suggestion that she work on herself before dating. "I was at the table behind you, finishing dinner after long shift at Children's Hospital," Andre explained, his mention of hospital immediately recontextualizing him as medical professional rather than random stranger, making his intervention seem less like pickup attempt and more like extension of caregiving that characterized his professional identity. "I'm pediatric nurse, which means I spend my days comforting scared kids and watching parents navigate medical crises with grace. What I don't have patience for is watching adults be deliberately cruel to each other when kindness costs nothing." The explanation was both disarming and oddly specific. He wasn't claiming to be night-rescuing damsel. He was positioning himself as professional caregiver whose job required noticing suffering and intervening, making his presence at her table feel less like romantic gesture and more like medical triage for emotional wound that Derek had inflicted. "I appreciate the sentiment, but honestly, part of me wonders if he was right," Jasmine said, her confession emerging with exhausted honesty that 2 years of body image struggle had created. "I have gained weight. My photos don't show how I look now. Maybe I was false advertising without meaning to." "Stop," Andre said firmly, his tone shifting from gentle to authoritative in a way that suggested he was drawing on nursing experience telling patients difficult truths. "Nothing about your appearance justified that man's cruelty. You didn't false advertise. You existed in body that changes over time like every human body does, and he chose to respond to normal human variation with dehumanizing rejection. His behavior wasn't about your body, it was about his character, and his character is clearly terrible." "But," Jasmine started. "No buts," Andre interrupted. "I'm going to tell you something personal that I don't usually share with strangers, but you need to hear it right now. 3 years ago, my wife died from breast cancer. In the 6 months after her death, I gained 63 pounds because grief destroyed my appetite regulation, and eating was only thing that made me feel temporarily better. People commented constantly, 'You need to take care of yourself, Andre. Your wife wouldn't want you letting yourself go. You're setting bad example for your daughter.' Every comment was framed as concern, but what I heard was judgment that my grief wasn't manifesting in an acceptable way." Jasmine stared at Andre as his confession recontextualized his intervention. He wasn't random, kind stranger. He was someone who'd experienced body-based judgment during vulnerable period and who recognized her pain because he'd lived version of it. I eventually lost the weight through therapy and processing grief in healthier ways, Andre continued. But those 6 months taught me that people's cruelty about bodies has nothing to do with health or concern, and everything to do with discomfort with bodies that don't meet arbitrary aesthetic standards. What happened to you tonight wasn't about your photos or your weight. It was about man whose shallow values made him incapable of seeing human being in front of him. For the first time since Derek had left, Jasmine felt something other than shame. She felt understood by a stranger who'd experienced his own version of body-based rejection and who was offering not just comfort, but validation that her worth wasn't determined by man who'd judged her appearance in 4 minutes. "Thank you," Jasmine whispered, fresh tears falling, but these felt different. Less like shame and more like release of tension she'd been carrying. "I don't know why you're being so kind to me, but thank you. I'm being kind because someone should have been kind to me when I was drowning in grief and weight gain and judgment," Andre replied simply. "And because my 9-year-old daughter Maya asks me every day how I helped people. And tonight I want to tell her that I sat with woman who needed someone to remind her that her worth isn't determined by cruel man's opinion." Some discoveries about human kindness emerge in moments of deepest humiliation when strangers offer dignity that cruelty tried to strip away. And sometimes the people who understand pain most completely are those who've experienced their own version of judgment that society pretends is concern, but which feels like dehumanization. Before we continue, I need you to understand something. If you felt Jasmine's humiliation, if you understood Andre's reason for intervening, if you've ever been judged for your body or witnessed someone being cruel about appearance, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that like button if Andre's words about his grief and weight gain moved you. Comment below. What time is it? Where are you watching from? Have you ever been rejected because of your appearance? Have you ever witnessed cruelty and wished someone would intervene? Would you have had the courage to do what Andre did? Because in part 2, we're going to learn more about the car accident that changed Jasmine's life. We're going to meet Andre's daughter Maya, who teaches both of them about real beauty. And we're going to see what happens when Derek shows up again. This time, Andre won't stay quiet. A woman humiliated for her body, a widower who understands grief's weight. One moment of kindness that rewrites everything. Don't go anywhere. Part 2 starts right now. The conversation that would transform Jasmine Reed's understanding of her own worth began 47 minutes after Andre Harrison had sat down at her table, when their discussion about grief and body image and human cruelty had evolved from stranger's intervention into genuine connection that neither of them had anticipated, but which felt oddly natural given that vulnerability about painful subjects created intimacy that small talk never could. "I should probably let you finish your evening," Jasmine said at 8:34 p.m., recognizing that Andre had spent nearly an hour sitting with devastated stranger when he'd presumably come to restaurant for quiet dinner after work shift, not to provide emotional support to woman whose date had publicly humiliated her. "You've already been incredibly kind, and I don't want to monopolize your entire Friday night with my breakdown. Jasmine, I came here tonight to eat pasta alone while reading medical journals on my phone, because that's what my Friday nights look like as single dad whose daughter is with his mother-in-law," Andre replied, his honest description of his solitary evening revealing that his intervention hadn't disrupted exciting plans, but had actually provided connection that his own life was apparently lacking. "Sitting with you and having actual human conversation has been better use of my evening than pretending to understand latest pediatric cardiology research while eating carbonara in isolation." At 33, Jasmine possessed careful skepticism that characterized women who'd experienced enough male attention to recognize when kindness was genuine versus when it was tactic. But Andre's transparency about his lonely Friday evenings and his framing of their conversation as mutually beneficial rather than one-sided charity suggested that his continued presence wasn't about pity or attraction, but about two people finding unexpected connection through shared understanding of pain. "Tell me about your daughter," Jasmine said, redirecting conversation towards safer topic than her body image crisis, though part of her recognized that asking about his child was also a way of evaluating his character, because men's relationships with their daughters often revealed truths about how they viewed women generally. "Maya is 9 years old, terrifyingly smart, and constantly teaching me about grace under pressure," Andre said, his voice transforming when discussing his daughter in a way that revealed parenting was central to his identity rather than inconvenient responsibility. Her mother died when Maya was 6, which means she spent her most formative years watching me figure out how to be both parents while processing grief that I didn't always handle well. The weight gain I mentioned earlier, Maya watched that happen, watched people comment on it, and asked me one day why I was letting strangers make me sad about my body. She was 7 years old and already understood that other people's opinions about appearance weren't worth internalizing. "She sounds remarkable," Jasmine said, processing that Andre's daughter had apparently inherited his emotional intelligence and his resistance to letting cruelty define self-worth. "How did you teach her that at 7? "I didn't teach her, I failed at it. And she learned from watching me struggle," Andre admitted with honesty. That felt refreshing after years of people presenting curated versions of themselves. "When I gained weight after my wife died, I internalized every comment about taking care of myself and setting good example for Maya. I let shame motivate my weight loss rather than health or genuine self-care. Maya watched me exercise obsessively and restrict eating and basically punish my body for grieving wrong way. One morning, she asked why I was being mean to yourself, Daddy, and I realized I was teaching her that bodies are problems to fix rather than vessels that carry us through life." The confession revealed that Andre's intervention tonight hadn't come from having perfectly resolved his own body image issues, but rather from ongoing process of learning not to let others' judgments determine self-worth, making his kindness feel more authentic because it came from someone still navigating similar struggles rather than from someone who'd transcended them completely. Meanwhile, across town at Derek Mitchell's upscale apartment, he was experiencing very different Friday evening as he posted to his social media about disastrous blind date with woman who'd catfished him with old photos, his post including enough identifying details about restaurant and Jasmine's appearance that anyone who'd been at Bella Vista that evening would recognize who he was describing, creating digital record of humiliation that extended beyond restaurant walls into online space, and where mockery could be amplified through shares and comments. "Blind date's a gamble, but tonight's was straight-up false advertising," Derek's post read, accompanied by laughing emoji that suggested he found situation amusing rather than reflecting on his own cruelty. "Pro tip, if your photos are from when you were 50 pounds lighter, maybe update them before wasting someone's time. I have standards, and I'm not apologizing for them. Be honest dating, just no fake photos. Standards." The post received 43 likes and 17 comments within 30 minutes, most of them validating Derek's position that he'd been victim of deception rather than perpetrator of cruelty, though 3 comments questioned whether public mockery of date's appearance was appropriate regardless of photo accuracy, creating small thread of dissent that Derek dismissed as virtue signaling from people who didn't understand importance of physical attraction in dating. Back at Bella Vista, Jasmine's phone buzzed with text from her friend Lauren, who'd set up the blind date. "OMG, I'm so sorry. Derek just posted about your date on social media and he's being horrible. I had no idea he was like this. Please tell me you left after 5 minutes and didn't let him ruin your night." Jasmine's hands trembled as she read message that confirmed her humiliation had been digitized and shared with Derek's 800-plus followers, transforming private, painful moment into public entertainment that would now exist permanently online, tagged with hashtags that reduced her to punchline about fake photos and false advertising. "He posted about me on social media?" Jasmine asked Andre, her voice breaking as she showed him Lauren's text. "It wasn't enough to reject me in person. He had to tell the internet about it." Andre's expression darkened as he read Lauren's message, his usual gentle demeanor shifting to controlled anger that suggested his patience for Derek's cruelty had reached its limit. "What's his full name?" Andre asked, his tone carrying edge that made Jasmine recognize that pediatric nurses' caregiving extended to protecting vulnerable people from ongoing harm, not just comforting them after initial injury. "Derek Mitchell." "Why?" Jasmine replied, uncertain about what Andre planned to do with that information. "Because I'm going to find his post and report it for harassment. And then I'm going to leave comment explaining exactly what I witnessed tonight. That he publicly humiliated women for gaining weight, and then bragged about it online like cruelty was achievement worth celebrating," Andre said, pulling out his phone with deliberate purpose. "I sat here quietly when he rejected you because confronting him in moment would have made scene worse for you. But now he's extended humiliation into digital space, and I'm not going to let that go unchallenged." "Andre, you don't have to do that," Jasmine protested, though part of her desperately wanted someone to defend her against Derek's narrative that positioned him as victim of deception rather than perpetrator of emotional violence. "It'll just create more drama, and honestly, I just want to forget this entire night happened." "Jasmine, I understand wanting to move past this, but Derek's post isn't just about you. It's contributing to culture where people feel entitled to mock others' appearances without consequences," Andre replied, his response revealing that his intervention was motivated by broader principle beyond just defending her specifically. "If I stay silent, I'm complicit in letting him normalize cruelty. And I spent too many months experiencing body-based judgment to watch someone weaponize it against another person without speaking up." As Andre typed comment on Derek's post, that detailed witness account of restaurant humiliation and challenged Derek's characterization of himself as victim, while Jasmine processed that stranger she'd met an hour ago was voluntarily entering public conflict on her behalf, both understood that Andre's kindness extended beyond private comfort to public defense of dignity that cruelty tried to strip away. "Posted," Andre said, showing Jasmine his comment. "I was at the restaurant tonight and witnessed your disastrous date. What I saw was you publicly humiliating woman for gaining weight, telling her to work on herself before dating, and leaving her crying while entire restaurant watched. Your standards aren't standards, they're cruelty disguised as honesty. This woman deserved basic human decency, which you failed to provide. Maybe reflect on your own character before judging others' bodies." "Andre Harrison, the man who sat with her after you left." The comment was direct, detailed, and completely undermined Derek's narrative that he'd been victim of deception, replacing his story with witness account that positioned him as perpetrator of public humiliation rather than innocent party protecting his standards. "He's going to be furious that you called him out," Jasmine said, her voice carrying mixture of gratitude and concern about Andre involving himself in conflict that could escalate beyond social media comments. "Let him be furious," Andre replied calmly. "His fury about being held accountable for cruelty is less important than making sure you know that witness to his behavior is willing to publicly state that he was wrong and you deserved better. Some moral choices require understanding that private kindness is insufficient when cruelty becomes public spectacle, and that defending dignity sometimes means entering conflicts that prudence would avoid because allowing cruelty to go unchallenged creates culture where humiliation is normalized and victims are blamed for perpetrators' behavior. 8 days after Andre Harrison's public comment defending Jasmine had gone viral, gaining 4,200 likes and sparking broader social media conversation about body shaming and dating culture cruelty, he found himself sitting in hospital HR director's office at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, facing professional consequences for social media activity that some hospital administrators characterized as unprofessional public conflict that reflected poorly on pediatric department's reputation and Andre's judgment as medical professional whose social media presence was supposed to maintain neutral professionalism. Andre, your comment on Derek Mitchell's post has been shared extensively, and several people have identified you as pediatric nurse at this hospital, HR Director Patricia Coleman explained, her tone suggesting that Andre's defense of Jasmine was being treated as institutional problem rather than personal expression of values. We've received complaints from donors and board members concerned that hospital employees are engaging in public conflicts that could damage our reputation if media coverage connects your social media activity to your employment here. At 36, Andre possessed careful awareness of how workplace politics often prioritized institutional reputation over employees' personal integrity, but being called to HR for defending women against cruel treatment felt like punishment for doing morally correct thing, creating situation where hospitals' concern about professional image was being used to silence staff who challenged cruelty that institutional neutrality would prefer to ignore. Patricia, I witnessed man publicly humiliate woman for her appearance, and when he posted about it online, misrepresenting himself as victim, I provided accurate witness account of what actually happened. Andre replied, his response framing his comment as factual correction rather than as personal attack. If hospital policy is that employees shouldn't challenge cruelty we witness, then that policy prioritizes institutional comfort over moral responsibility. Andre, hospital policy is that employees maintain professional social media presence that doesn't involve them in public conflicts, regardless of whether their individual positions are morally justified, Patricia clarified, using bureaucratic language that transformed Andre's defense of Jasmine into violation of professional conduct standards. Your comment may have been well-intentioned, but it's created situation where your name is associated with viral social media controversy, and that association affects hospitals' reputation whether we agree with your position or not. So you're saying that if I witness cruelty and someone posts about it publicly, I should stay silent because challenging false narratives might create controversy that reflects poorly on my employer? Andre asked, his question revealing absurdity of policy that required complicity with cruelty for sake of institutional neutrality. I'm saying that as hospital employee, your social media activity reflects on this institution, and engaging in public conflicts, even morally justified ones, creates risk that administration has determined isn't acceptable, Patricia replied, her tone making clear that this wasn't debate about principles, but rather delivery of institutional decision about Andre's conduct. As Andre processed that defending Jasmine was being characterized as professional misconduct, while Patricia explained that he'd received written warning about maintaining appropriate social media boundaries, both understood that institutions often punished employees whose public moral stands created complications that bureaucratic risk management preferred to avoid, making silence about witnessed cruelty seem professionally safer than speaking up regardless of ethical implications. Meanwhile, Jasmine was experiencing her own crisis as her employer's marketing director had called meeting to discuss social media situation, where Jasmine's identity had been revealed through Derek's post and subsequent viral discussion, creating situation where her professional colleagues now knew intimate details about her dating humiliation and body image struggles that workplace professionalism typically kept private. Jasmine, we need to discuss how your recent social media visibility affects your role as marketing manager, Director Michael Stevens said during meeting that Jasmine had been dreading since learning that co-workers had connected viral, fat-shaming date story to her. Several clients have mentioned seeing posts about your dating experience, and there are questions about whether personal controversies affect your ability to represent our brand professionally. Michael, I didn't create the social media situation. I was victim of public humiliation that someone else posted about, Jasmine replied, her frustration evident about being treated as problem when she'd been target of Derek's cruelty. I can't control that Derek posted about our date or that Andre's defense of me went viral. All I did was exist in my body and go on blind date that ended badly. I understand that you were victim in initial situation, but reality is that your name is now associated with viral controversy about body image and dating, and some clients feel that association creates complications for brand representation that our industry typically avoids, Michael explained, using corporate language that transformed Jasmine's victimization into professional liability. We're not terminating your position, but we're reassigning you from client-facing work to internal strategy role where public visibility is less critical. The reassignment was both practical and devastating. Jasmine was being professionally sidelined not because of poor performance, but because being publicly humiliated for her body had made her controversial in ways that corporate image management preferred to keep invisible, creating punishment for victimization that made her ongoing employment contingent on accepting diminished role where her appearance wouldn't potentially complicate brand representation. As Jasmine processed demotion that resulted from being victim of cruelty rather than from any professional failure, while Andre faced written warning for defending her publicly, both understood that institutional responses to viral social media moments often punished people who'd been harmed or who'd defended victims rather than addressing underlying cruelty that had created controversy, making silence seem professionally safer than moral clarity, regardless of ethical costs. Andre, I'm so sorry that defending me is costing you professionally, Jasmine said during phone call at 7:34 p.m. after both had experienced workplace consequences for viral moment neither had created intentionally. If I'd known that your comment would go viral and create problems for you at hospital, I would have asked you not to post it. Jasmine, don't apologize for my choice to defend you, Andre replied firmly. Getting written warning for challenging cruelty is acceptable cost of refusing to be complicit in culture where people like Derek can humiliate others without consequences. If hospital wants to punish me for having moral clarity about witnessed harm, that tells me something important about institutional values. But you have Maya to support. You can't afford to lose your job over social media comment defending stranger you met once, Jasmine protested, recognizing that Andre's single-parent responsibilities made workplace conflict more risky for him than for employees without dependent children. First, you're not stranger anymore. We've been talking daily for 8 days, and you've become friend whose well-being I care about, Andre said, his characterization of their relationship revealing that his initial intervention had evolved into genuine connection. Second, I'm not going to lose my job over written warning. I'm just being reminded that institutions value reputation over righteousness. And third, Maya asked me last night what I did to help people this week, and I told her about defending women who'd been treated cruelly. She said, "Daddy, that was brave," which matters more to me than HR directors' concern about professional image. Some sacrifices require understanding that doing morally correct thing creates professional consequences that institutions impose for disrupting comfortable neutrality, and that choosing integrity over institutional approval teaches children more valuable lessons about character than compliance with rules designed to prioritize reputation over righteousness ever could. 19 days after viral social media moment had created professional complications for both Andre and Jasmine. They found themselves forming unexpected alliance based not on romantic attraction, though that was developing quietly beneath their friendship, but on shared recognition that their individual struggles with institutional punishment for moral clarity could be transformed into broader advocacy against body shaming and dating culture cruelty that had harmed Jasmine and that Andre's defense had exposed as systemic problem rather than isolated incident. I've been contacted by 3 different women who saw your comment defending me and who wanted to share their own experiences with dates who publicly humiliated them for their appearance. Jasmine reported during their daily phone call that had become routine over past 3 weeks. One woman was told she was too muscular for guy who wanted feminine woman. Another was mocked for having mastectomy scars from breast cancer, and third was rejected for having visible disability that her photos hadn't adequately conveyed according to her date. At 33, Jasmine possessed emerging awareness that her humiliation by Derek had been individual manifestation of broader cultural problem where people felt entitled to judge others' bodies as acceptable or unacceptable for romantic consideration, and that sharing stories created collective recognition of pattern that seemed more systemic when documented across multiple experiences rather than dismissed as isolated incidents of individual rudeness. What if we created platform for people to share these experiences anonymously? Andre proposed, his suggestion reflecting pediatric nurses' instinct toward creating support systems for vulnerable populations. Not as revenge site or public shaming, but as documentation of how common this cruelty is and how much harm it creates. We could call it dignity dating or something similar, focusing on promoting culture where basic human respect is baseline expectation, regardless of whether romantic attraction develops. You want to start advocacy organization because you defended me once on social media? Jasmine asked, processing that Andre's involvement in her situation had apparently motivated him toward broader activism rather than just providing comfort during crisis. I want to start advocacy organization because defending you made visible problem I'd been ignoring. That dating culture normalizes cruelty toward bodies that don't meet arbitrary standards, and that people experiencing this cruelty often internalize shame rather than recognizing that perpetrators' behavior reflects their character, not victims' worth. Andre explained, his response revealing that past 3 weeks had crystallized his thinking about body-based discrimination in ways that went beyond just supporting Jasmine. My experience with weight gain after my wife died taught me about judgment. But your experience showed me that judgment is weaponized specifically in dating contexts, where rejection based on appearance is treated as acceptable preference rather than as discrimination. As their conversation evolved from processing individual experiences toward planning collective response, both recognized that alliance they were forming transcended their personal connection to address broader cultural problem that institutional responses, hospital HR warning, and Jasmine's workplace demotion had inadvertently validated by treating viral attention to body shaming as problem, rather than recognizing body shaming itself as issue requiring cultural change. Over following 6 weeks, Andre and Jasmine built Dignity Dating as combination support forum and advocacy platform that collected anonymous stories about dating experiences involving body-based humiliation, providing resources about self-worth and healthy relationship standards, and creating educational content challenging cultural norms that treated physical appearance as legitimate basis for dehumanizing rejection. We've received 847 story submissions in 6 weeks, Andre reported during video call, where he and Jasmine reviewed platform analytics while his daughter Maya did homework at kitchen table behind him, occasionally interjecting observations about Daddy's project with Miss Jasmine. 63% involve weight-based rejection, 17% involve disability or visible difference, 12% involve age-based comments, and 8% involve other appearance factors. The pattern is overwhelming. People are experiencing systematic cruelty disguised as dating preferences. And Platform has 4,300 registered users who are either sharing stories or accessing resources, Jasmine added, processing that their response to her individual humiliation had created community-addressing collective problem. We're getting messages from therapists asking to use our content in sessions with clients struggling with body image after dating rejection, which suggests we're providing value beyond just story collection. As their alliance strengthened through shared advocacy work, Andre's daughter Maya became unexpected contributor when she asked during family dinner why some people are mean about how other people look, creating teaching moment that revealed 9-year-old's capacity for understanding discrimination and her desire to contribute to solution. Maya asked if she could write something for Dignity Dating about what kids learn from watching adults be cruel, Andre told Jasmine during call. She wants to explain that when kids see grown-ups mock people's bodies, kids learn that appearance is more important than kindness. I think her perspective could be a powerful addition to Platform, showing that adult cruelty creates generational cycle where children absorb values we're modeling through our behavior. A 9-year-old writing about dignity and body acceptance could be exactly the perspective that reaches people who dismiss adult complaints as oversensitivity. Jasmine agreed, recognizing that Maya's involvement would add dimension to Platform that adult voices couldn't provide. Would you feel comfortable having her contribute if we protect her privacy? As Maya's essay, What I Learn When Adults Are Mean, was posted to Dignity Dating under pseudonym, her child's perspective on how adult cruelty shaped children's understanding of human worth created viral moment that surpassed even Andre's original comment defending Jasmine. Bringing Platform to attention of media outlets and advocacy organizations that recognized value in amplifying voices challenging dating cultures, normalization of appearance-based dehumanization. Good Morning America wants to interview us about Dignity Dating and Maya's essay, Andre announced 3 days after Maya's piece had been shared 23,000 times. They want to do segment on teaching children dignity in age of dating apps and body shaming. And then are you comfortable being publicly identified as co-founder? I spent 3 weeks hiding from social media after Derek's post made me viral cautionary tale about false advertising, Jasmine replied. Being publicly identified as co-founder of Platform challenging that narrative feels like reclaiming story that was told about me without my consent. Yes, I'm comfortable with it. Some alliances transform individual pain into collective advocacy when victims of cruelty recognize that their experiences represent patterns requiring cultural change rather than just personal misfortune, and when defenders of dignity channel their moral clarity into building systems that support vulnerable people while challenging norms that normalize dehumanization disguised as preference. The confrontation that would determine whether Andre and Jasmine's advocacy work could survive institutional and personal backlash reached its climax when Derek Mitchell filed lawsuit alleging that Dignity Dating Platform constituted defamation campaign against him, claiming that anonymous stories shared on site created false narrative about his character, and that Andre's continued involvement in Platform represented ongoing harassment stemming from their original social media conflict. Andre, Derek Mitchell's attorney, sent cease and desist letter demanding that we remove all content from Dignity Dating that references restaurant incident and that we issue public apology for creating Platform that his lawsuit alleges exists primarily to malign his reputation, Jasmine reported during emergency call at 9:47 p.m. on Tuesday evening, her voice carrying stress about legal threat that neither of them had anticipated or had resources to defend against comprehensively. At 36, Andre possessed careful assessment of risk that single parenthood required, recognizing that lawsuit, even frivolous one, could create financial burden through legal fees and time commitment that would affect his ability to provide stability for Maya, making Derek's legal action feel like strategic attempt to silence advocacy work by imposing costs that defendants couldn't sustain regardless of lawsuit's merit. Derek is claiming that platform we built to support people experiencing body-based humiliation is actually defamation campaign against him specifically? Andre asked, processing legal theory that seemed deliberately designed to characterize collective testimony about widespread problem as personal attack against individual perpetrator. That's absurd legal position. We don't mention him by name on platform, and anonymous stories from 847 different people can't constitute defamation of single individual. His lawsuit argues that anyone who saw viral posts about our situation can connect platform to his restaurant incident, and that therefore platform exists primarily to damage his reputation through implication. Jasmine explained, reading from cease and desist letter that revealed Derek had hired attorney specializing in online defamation. He's threatening to sue both of us personally, plus any media outlets that interviewed us, claiming that platform constitutes malicious campaign stemming from my vindictive response to his honest communication about photo accuracy. He's characterizing publicly humiliating you as honest communication and our advocacy work as vindictive response, Andre said, his voice carrying controlled anger about Derek's continued refusal to accept responsibility for cruelty while positioning himself as victim of consequences. This lawsuit isn't actually about defamation. It's slap suit designed to silence advocacy through expensive legal process that he hopes we can't afford to defend. As Andre and Jasmine process legal threat that could potentially bankrupt them through defense costs regardless of lawsuit's merit, while Derek's attorney demanded platform shutdown and public apology that would validate his narrative about being wrongly maligned, both understood that confrontation had escalated from social media dispute to legal battle that would determine whether advocating against cruelty could survive when perpetrators weaponized legal system to silence critics. Meanwhile, hospital administration was experiencing their own crisis as Derek's lawsuit named Children's Hospital as defendant based on theory that Andre's social media activity had been facilitated by hospital employment, and that institution bore liability for employees' harassment campaign that had allegedly begun with his comment defending Jasmine. Andre, hospital legal department is extremely concerned about being named in Derek Mitchell's lawsuit, Patricia Coleman explained during second HR meeting about Andre's social media activity. Administration is considering whether your continued employment creates ongoing liability exposure if Derek's attorney argues that hospital's failure to discipline you adequately after first incident constitutes institutional endorsement of harassment. Patricia, hospital is being sued because Derek's attorney is throwing every possible defendant into lawsuit, hoping someone settles to avoid legal costs, Andre replied, recognizing that hospital's risk aversion made them vulnerable to exactly the slap suit strategy that Derek was employing. If hospital terminates my employment because frivolous lawsuit named us as defendants, you're allowing litigant to control personnel decisions through legal intimidation. Andre, hospital administration's priority is protecting institution from liability, not defending employees' social media activism, Patricia said bluntly, her statement revealing that hospital would sacrifice Andre's employment if doing so reduced their legal exposure. We're consulting with legal department about options, but you should be prepared for possibility that protecting hospital requires separating from your employment here. As hospital considered terminating Andre to reduce lawsuit exposure, while Jasmine's employer similarly pressured her to distance herself from platform that had created legal complications, Both advocates understood that defending dignity against cruelty had created exactly the professional and personal costs that institutions' preference for neutrality had warned would result from public moral stands. The media attention that had initially supported dignity dating began shifting as Derek's attorney provided interviews characterizing lawsuit as necessary defense against online mob justice and portraying Andre as nurse who violated professional ethics by harassing private citizen over dating disagreement, creating competing narrative that reframed advocacy as vigilante campaign rather than as collective response to documented pattern of cruelty. "We're losing public relations battle," Jasmine observed during strategy session about lawsuit defense. Derek's attorney is skilled at making this sound like we're targeting him personally rather than addressing systemic problem, and media outlets are starting to present both sides, as if our advocacy against body shaming is morally equivalent to his lawsuit trying to silence victims. Which is exactly what slap suits are designed to do: create enough doubt about defendants' motives that public support evaporates and advocacy collapses under financial and reputational pressure, Andre replied. His understanding of legal strategy revealing that lawsuits' goal wasn't winning judgment, but rather forcing platform shutdown through unsustainable defense costs. As legal battle intensified with Derek demanding $750,000 in damages for reputational harm, while Andre faced termination, and Jasmine considered whether protecting her career required abandoning platform they'd built. Both advocates confronted that standing against cruelty created costs that good intentions alone couldn't sustain, when legal system could be weaponized by perpetrators who had resources to impose financial burden that defendants couldn't match. "I have $18,000 in savings and Maya's college fund that I absolutely cannot touch," Andre said during honest conversation about their resources. "I can't afford an attorney who could competently defend against Derek's lawsuit, which means I'm probably going to lose by default when I can't respond to legal filings adequately. And I have $31,000 in savings that represents 2 years of financial recovery after losing job when I gained weight," Jasmine added, revealing that her professional demotion had been preceded by earlier termination that she hadn't previously disclosed. "We're exactly the kind of defendants that slap suits target, people with moral clarity but without resources to defend it legally. Some confrontations with perpetrators reveal that cruelty can be sustained through legal weaponization when institutions prioritize liability reduction over moral clarity, and that advocacy requires resources beyond just conviction when legal system allows wealthy defendants to silence critics through expensive process regardless of underlying merit." 28 months after Derek Mitchell's slap suit had been dismissed with prejudice following intervention by anti-slap advocacy organization that had provided pro bono legal representation, Andre Harrison stood in Community Center hosting Dignity Dating's second annual conference on body acceptance and ethical dating culture, watching Jasmine Reed deliver keynote address to audience of 340 people whose attendance represented transformation of their crisis response into sustainable advocacy organization that had outlasted legal intimidation and institutional pressure through community support that had emerged when their story resonated with people who'd experienced similar cruelty. The conference was funded by donations, grants from body-positive organizations, and partnership with therapy practices that used dignity dating resources with clients, representing financial sustainability that neither Andre nor Jasmine had imagined possible when they'd started platform as crisis response to viral moment that had exposed dating culture's normalization of appearance-based dehumanization. 2 years ago, I sat in restaurant crying after date had publicly humiliated me for gaining weight, convinced that my body made me unworthy of love or basic human dignity. Jasmine said during keynote that drew on personal experience while contextualizing it within broader advocacy mission. What I didn't know was that man at next table, Andre Harrison, pediatric nurse and widower who understood grief's impact on bodies, would intervene not just to comfort me, but to spark movement challenging culture that treats appearance-based cruelty as acceptable dating behavior. At 35, Jasmine possessed integrated identity that characterized people whose trauma had been transformed through advocacy that gave suffering collective meaning rather than just private pain. She'd lost marketing manager position when her employer deemed her too controversial after viral moment, but had built new career as Dignity Dating's executive director, creating professional purpose from experience that had initially felt like pure destruction. Our platform has now collected over 12,000 stories from people experiencing body-based rejection, and consistent pattern emerges, Jasmine continued, presenting data that demonstrated systematic nature of problem they were addressing. 74% of respondents report that humiliation occurred publicly rather than privately, suggesting that perpetrators feel entitled to audience for their cruelty. 81% internalize shame rather than recognizing perpetrators' behavior as character flaw. And 63% modified their dating behavior afterward, removing photos, lowering standards, accepting treatment they knew was wrong because they'd learned that their bodies made them vulnerable to dehumanization. Meanwhile, Andre was experiencing his own transformation as hospital administration, facing public pressure after his termination for social media conduct had been covered by local news as retaliation for advocacy work, had reversed their decision and issued formal apology, acknowledging that their initial response had prioritized institutional liability over employees' legitimate expression of values outside workplace context. Hospital reinstated me with back pay and revised their social media policy to distinguish between personal advocacy and professional misconduct, Andre had announced during Dignity Dating Board meeting 3 months ago. More importantly, they're partnering with us to provide body acceptance training for medical staff, acknowledging that healthcare settings often perpetuate appearance-based discrimination that harms patient care. At 38, Andre possessed quiet satisfaction that characterized people whose professional vindication had come through persistence rather than immediate validation. He'd lost job, faced lawsuit, considered abandoning advocacy when costs seemed unsustainable, but had ultimately seen institutions recognize that punishing defenders of dignity created worse reputational consequences than supporting employee activism that aligned with stated values about treating all people with respect. The transformation that neither Andre nor Jasmine discussed publicly, but which conference attendees speculated about, was personal relationship that had evolved from crisis intervention to friendship to partnership to something more intimate that both of them had approached carefully given that their connection had begun during Jasmine's moment of deepest vulnerability, and neither wanted romance built on rescue dynamic rather than genuine compatibility. Maya asks me constantly when Miss Jasmine is going to officially move in with us instead of just staying over 4 nights a week, Andre had mentioned during private conversation before conference began. She's 9 years old, but apparently capable of recognizing that adults' careful maintenance of separate residences is performance rather than reality. Adit, your daughter is perceptive, Jasmine replied with smile that suggested she'd been having similar thoughts about their deliberately gradual relationship progression that had been shaped by both of them wanting to ensure that romance emerged from equality rather than from gratitude or rescue. I wanted to make sure that what I felt for you wasn't just appreciation for defending me when I was vulnerable, and that what you felt for me wasn't just protective instinct towards someone you'd helped. 28 months seems like adequate testing period for distinguishing rescue romance from actual compatibility, So you're saying you're ready to acknowledge that we're actually in committed relationship rather than just close friends who occasionally stay over? Andre asked, his gentle teasing revealing comfort level that 2 years had built. I'm saying that man who defended my dignity when stranger had destroyed it has spent 28 months proving that intervention wasn't isolated kindness, but rather reflection of character that makes him exactly kind of partner I didn't think existed when Derek was telling me I should work on myself before dating, Jasmine replied, her response both vulnerable and definitive about feelings that careful friendship had developed into love that felt sustainable rather than dramatic. As conference continued, with workshops on establishing boundaries in dating, recognizing red flags for appearance-based discrimination, and building self-worth independent of romantic validation, Maya Harrison, now 11 years old, participated in youth panel discussing what kids learn from adults' dating behavior, her presentation drawing on essay she'd written 2 years ago that had gone viral and sparked her own advocacy work in school about kindness and appearance acceptance. When my dad defended Miss Jasmine after mean man was cruel to her, I learned that good people don't stay quiet when they see someone being hurt, Maya told conference audience with 11-year-old clarity. And when Miss Jasmine turned her hurt into helping other people, I learned that bad things can become good things if we use our pain to make world better. Now Miss Jasmine lives with us, and I have 2 parents again, even though she's not my mom, and our family is proof that kindness creates more kindness. The simple articulation of how their advocacy had created family alongside organizational mission revealed that dignity dating's impact extended beyond changing dating culture to include personal transformation, where crisis intervention had evolved into sustainable commitment that benefited everyone involved. 3 years after Andre had approached crying stranger in restaurant and offered kindness that Cruelty had denied, he stood beside Jasmine, watching their advocacy organization's conference conclude with commitment ceremony, where couples who'd met through Dignity dating platform, people who'd connected through shared experiences with body-based rejection, and who'd built relationships on foundation of mutual respect rather than appearance-based attraction, celebrated partnerships that proved alternative to cruelty-based dating culture was possible when people prioritized dignity over arbitrary aesthetic standards. We built something that matters, Jasmine said quietly as they watched ceremony. Derek tried to destroy us through lawsuit. Hospitals and employers tried to silence us through termination threats, and institutions tried to minimize us through risk-averse policies. But we built community that's stronger than all that resistance, and we created family, you, me, Maya, that emerged from refusing to accept that cruelty should go unchallenged. We built it together, Andre replied, taking her hand in gesture that public setting and 3 years of partnership had made natural. You transformed your pain into purpose. I transformed my grief into advocacy. And Maya learned that defending dignity matters more than avoiding conflict. That's family built not on rescue but on shared values. Some families emerge not from conventional romance but from crisis intervention that reveals shared values leading to partnership built on mutual respect. And some advocacy organizations emerge not from strategic planning but from refusing to accept that cruelty should be normalized. When calling it out creates costs that courage can sustain, when community supports clarity about what matters more than institutional approval or perpetrators' legal intimidation. The end. If you felt Jasmine's humiliation and Andre's courage to intervene, if you understood what it means when kindness rewrites a night of cruelty, if you've ever been judged for your body or witnessed someone being dehumanized, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Comment below. What time is it? Where are you watching from? Have you ever experienced body-based rejection? Have you ever witnessed cruelty and wished someone would intervene? Would you have had Andre's courage to stand up? Share this with anyone who needs to understand that dignity matters more than appearance, that kindness can transform cruelty into purpose, and that families are built on shared values rather than conventional paths. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.